possession. Whatever certainty you've known.
Gentlemen, my name is Mark DiCarlo. Tonight my guest is Mr. Emmett Reyes, a new attorney just out of law school.
Yes.
I was going to say young, but you took quite a break before you went to law school, right?
That's correct. I used to be a school teacher for about 5 years before I entertained the thought of going back to school.
I see. So which law school did you go to?
I went to Thorogood Marshall School of Law in Houston, Texas.
Now that's the minority law school in Houston, isn't it? It used to be, wasn't it set that law school set up particularly for, was it African Americans, Black Americans, or how did that work?
It has a long history. It was created, I believe, I forgot the Supreme Court decision, and they told it to us several times. But one African American student went to UT, and he got accepted to UT, but on his application, he didn't put that he was African American, because at that time they weren't allowing African Americans into law school. So when he got accepted, he showed up to the first day. They realized that he was, an African American gentleman. So they said, well, you can't come to school. And this is during the time where it was, separate but equal. So the court said, well, you have to create a law school for African Americans. And then thus they created the.
What year would that have been?
Probably in the 60s and 50s, 60s.
Now, that's an interesting story. Is that who no, obviously the school is named for the Supreme Court Justice. So, is it expensive to go to law school now?
It's very expensive. You could, on average, expect about $100,000 to be in debt.
Now, I'm going to give you a hard time about that. You could expect to be $100,000 in debt, but how much are the tuitions and books? Like when you just got out, right?
Yeah.
Okay. How much were the tuition and books at Thurgood Marshall Law School, which is a public school?
That's correct. Thorogood Marshall is a state school, just like UT, U of H. Those are all state schools. So with the state school tuition, it runs about. I was paying around $8,000 to $9,000 a semester.
$8,000 to $9,000 a semester.
A semester. This is just
books,
not books, just tuition. But that's a substantial savings.
University of Houston and University of Texas are that much now?
Yeah, but that's a cheap rate. That's about as cheap as you get. So if you're getting offers to go into South Texas College of Law, St. Mary's,
the private schools, how much are the private schools a semester?
$15,000 to $20,000.
That is unbelievable, because when I went to law school in 1981 through 1984 at University of Houston, it was like nothing. And I could tell you that I paid more to go to Ohio State one year in 1973, 3 times more than I did to pay tuition at University of Houston, 3 times more in 1981. I wonder when those extreme increases in tuition happened.
I don't know.
And then that's just unbelievable. So do you think it's a worthwhile investment?
You hope so. That's the American dream. And it's funny because when I was an undergrad at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, I was a lot younger, and you just had this fantasy that, you go into college, you graduate, and you're going to have a job, and you're going to succeed in life. That was what everybody tells you. So you weren't too concerned about what degree or what major you're in. You just wanted to get through it, get out of college, have fun while you're in there.
Well, we had the same idea too when I went to college from 73 to 77. But there were several things going on then. We were in a different part of the country. The economy was changing. So I thought that college kids knew better than that. In the more recent, no.
But
no. Okay, so in law school, how do they teach you? I've heard of in our school they used a lot of times the Socratic method, wherein everybody sitting there, then they'd ask you questions. Well, Mr. Reyes, what if you walk into Walmart and you slip and fall on the threshold, and you didn't see the threshold because whatever was dark,
Yeah,
so
they use the same method, and it was really tough. The first year, they really tried to scare you, and they weren't messing around, because it was true. There is an attrition rate, and they do cut you. Your first year, they have you brief cases, and
but they don't have you brief it. You brief them. The students brief them on their own with the idea they're going to learn the law in that case, right?
correct. And they're going to call on you while you're in class. You just don't know if you're getting called on that day.
But you're called on in class. They'll stand you up and they'll ask you this series of questions, right?
Correct.
But in theory, you're not graded on the answers to those series of questions.
No, but you have to be prepared to fully discuss the case at length. Or if you weren't prepared, I know for one of our professors, they would pretty much say, if you weren't prepared and I call on you, you need to leave. And that was the consequence.
There's a lot of social implications. I know of a student or two, one student who said he wasn't prepared, and they didn't really kick him out or anything. And then, of course, some people, you were called on, you didn't do a real good job. What I found particularly frustrating, in my opinion, is you could study in a manner to be prepared to answer the questions, versus I think there was another way to study to learn the law that you needed to know for the course.
Yeah.
And then some of the teachers, they had different levels that they wanted you to learn it. So it was very difficult.
It was a big disconnect, especially
Right.
your first year, because you're so scared that you're going to get called on. You have to present this case brief to the
Right.
higher in class, and you get
And you
drilled.
could study for the case brief.
And that's what you did. You
That's
just
what a lot
studied
of
up
people
and
did.
down.
But
then
I'm not certain that you learned the law then.
You're missing the law.
Well, one of you talked about a disconnect, and what I'd always said was, is there any correlation at all between, maybe I'll take it even back further, how you do in college, how you do on the law school aptitude test, how you do in law school, whether or not you pass the bar, and how good a lawyer you are? I think it's almost a total disconnect between the 5 things.
It is. I truly believe it is. It's to me, it's one big money making process. First of all, they want to test you. It's very tough to get in. They always say the hardest part about law school is getting into law school, which is you have to take the LSAT, and
that was a pretty major job back when I went to school. Well, we thought it was when we went in, because the LSAT was 4 hours.
Yes.
4 hours, but then when you go take the bar, it's like 3 days, right?
2.5 days of testing.
Right? And then of course law school week, when you take, and I can't even remember, but I think, weren't your laws for every class, every test was like 2 to 4 hours of writing?
Yes.
2 to 4 hours of writing, and then for every class, and then you might have 6 classes. I don't remember.
Around 5 to 6.
Okay.
It depends.
So you're talking about at least a whole weeks or 2 weeks worth of finals.
We had 2 weeks worth of finals, and they would break it, try to space it out as best as they could.
But the big deal when I went, we didn't use a laptop. Do you use a laptop to do it for everything?
Yeah, it was really
So how
fun.
do they prevent you from cheating, loading answers on your laptop?
Well, to be honest
do
with
that?
you, they have the policy saying you're not supposed to be on the internet, and it's mainly for, you don't use the laptop to write your essays. That will be like on the blue books. They want the pen and pencil.
So you're still writing.
You're still writing your essays, but as far as class and lecture, they'll tell you that you need to stay off.
Now, in theory, they used to tell us that the blue book, that your test was blind graded, that it was very objective. They didn't know who you were, and that it was a blind graded test. Do they still tell you that?
They still tell us that.
Do you believe that's true? Do you believe the professors really don't know?
I think they don't know. I had a good, I had faith in that system, because you would have to they would give you a secret number. You put your social security to it and give it to.
See, I think if an unethical or diabolical professor could get around it. A friend of mine went to University of Texas Law School. And he had a little bit of a hard time. Go through, because it's hard, right? and he was like, from the north, and shuffled down here. But what he said, it was revealed to him. When you sign in on the sheets, the what do they call it? The seating chart. Sometimes every day, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they use that as a template then. Once you sign in on that seating chart with your handwriting, they can use that as a template to judge your blue book. That's
For
what
us,
it
it's the
it's like a
number.
magic trick. If that's true, I've just revealed something to the world. I don't know if I could believe it. It makes sense. But you had faith in the system that was working as
Yeah,
was
because they would give you
represented to be.
numbers, 4 numbers, and that was your signature, was your number, and it changed every test.
And when you get out of law school, you take the bar examination, right?
Yes.
And how many days was the bar examination?
It's over 3 days
Mm-hmm.
worth of testing. The first day, it's a half a day, and that's where you go over your procedure and evidence, both civil and criminal. And
Does that cost you money?
for the bar exam?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
How much money does the bar exam cost?
I believe the bar exam is for the state of Texas is don't quote me, but around $400 or $500 just to take the test.
Okay, $400 to $500 to take the 3-day test.
Because you have to fill out a lot of forms. You have to get fingerprints,
And then
background.
They used to have a bar review course when you would take this bar review course. The popular one used to be called Barbary, BAR/BRI. And I don't know how much that cost, but how much would Barbary cost now to help you prepare for the bar examination?
Barbary, I decided not to go with Barbary just because they were on the higher end. I believe they were charging probably between $2,000 to $3,000 for the course.
Wow, that's a lot too. So which one did you take?
I went with PMBR. Kaplan University bought out PMBR, so it's Kaplan PMBR. I went with that format because it was all internet based. There was no lectures to classes to go to, and I had an opportunity to move back to Corpus Christi where I studied here for the bar. And
So when you studied for the bar examination, did you just read these books, or did they have tapes or CDs or video?
yeah, it was a format. In the morning, you would watch the video of the class lecture. If it was family law, you would watch family law.
Where would you do this, on your computer at home?
All on my computer at home.
Well, that makes it quite a bit more convenient, instead of, especially if you be going to University of Houston to take the Barbary course. We used to drive in every day to these lectures, and of course with the traffic in Houston, you had a lot of time wasted fighting the city. I'm sorry.
Oh no, and you really don't have that much time to waste during your bar study because you only have 2 months.
It used to be, of course, then it used to be said that there was some prestige regarding the percentage of people that pass the bar examination. And it used to be actually the better law schools in the state, maybe University of Texas being the hardest law school to get in academically, didn't have nearly the highest passing rate on the bar. And the reason for that was that even though the statistics were published, they were above teaching to the bar.
Yes.
They were above, for the teaching those classes for the bar examination. But I guess that's no longer. Do you know if that's still the truth? Wherein all the law schools now have teach for you to pass the bar examination.
That's the way it's moved to now. I mean,
It's kind of like in schools with the standardized testing, right?
Yeah, they're teaching to the bar mainly, and if they're not teaching to the bar, you will see a lot of students be a little bit upset that they're teaching more theory.
Well, what was happening? Right, what was happening when I was going to law school? They were going over. There was a transition state, basically from common law to this proliferation of statutes and penal codes and all this. So a lot of the Barbary, et cetera, didn't really teach to the state statutes, and they were still teaching to the common law and all that. And they were pulling the rug out from underneath the Barbary course and all that, because it became, the bar started just to teach to the statute.
Yes.
The bar demanded the knowledge that was in the statute, which this is interesting. I don't know if you're aware of this, but it's kind of a big, interesting transition in the law to me has been, all our law used to basically be common law. Now the legislatures have taken everything over, and they pass these minute laws, and they'll write out, like, let's say in the criminal law, they wrote out intent in a lot of the statutes. Were you aware of that?
No.
Years ago, they had, most of the statutes you had to prove intent. Most of the laws, criminal law, you had to prove intent. They wrote that out. They made all these changes. So I don't know if people are, I hear the reason I'm bringing up, I always hear the conservatives say, oh, well, there's, so-and-so's controlling, they're legislating from the bench or legislating this. Man, in my opinion, they're legislating from the legislature, and they're changing it every day. And I'm sure that even when you went to law school, they probably well, now there's this new evidence law, there's this new...
Oh, it
Right?
changes. It changes all the time,
Right.
And usually, sometimes even when there would be a change in the law, they would assure you that the Texas bar would be teaching the old law, because they would have to wait about 3 to 4 years to actually test any new law, just because of the freshman or the one.
So
else
you had
coming
this,
in.
you had, again, what you would call a disconnect. You weren't sure, though, really. They can't guarantee it.
They can't guarantee it. Correct.
So you said that they would stand you up in class, right, and all that, right?
Yeah,
Was that
it-
embarrassing for a lot of students?
It was terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
It was simply terrifying to be called upon, because you're in a big auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
There's 100 students, and then they're going to call you up to brief a case.
Well, it's terrifying because of the way they do it.
Yes.
It's not like this interview show here. You don't answer whatever, or you don't suppress people. It's terrifying the way they do it. It's like almost like a cross-examination in a way, isn't it?
It is. It very much so, and and they're testing you on the very fine points of the cases, and of course you're among your peers, and you don't want to be wrong when you're giving the answers, and it keeps you up at night studying. That's for sure.
And then the argument was, you do that Socratic method. You're answering these hypothetical questions, but then when you write the answers to the hypotheticals at the end of the course, you're basically giving whatever tort book law or written law. It has nothing to do with it. Is that right? Do you think?
For the testing
Yeah.
and the case, it's completely different.
It's completely different than what
Completely
than what they're doing in classes.
Yes, it's the case law defines the rule of law. So they'll teach you the rule of law, and then I guess the case law defines it.
So they're teaching you how to think at the Socratic method when they ask the questions in the classroom, but when you go into that class at the end of the course, you're expected to have the law memorized and to spit it out on the test, right?
Correct.
Okay. So you quit teaching school, right?
Correct.
And what did you, to go to law school? And what did you teach in school?
I was a special education teacher. I used to teach at Mary Gret for about 5 years. 2 years I was in the classroom. I had an adaptive education class. So my kids were about from 18 to 22 years old. So this was after high school. They would be aging out. They would go from King, Miller, Moody, and they would come to Mary Gret, and then we would teach them life skills. So it would be half day with me, and then the other half day they would have a job.
You taught adults.
I taught
18 to
adults.
22.
Yes.
And when you started that right out of college, you were almost as old as you, right?
Yes.
Pretty close.
Yes.
So what is Mary Gret? Where's this school? I never heard of it.
Mary Gret's located next to Chula Vista in Cuttingham. It's in the Greenwood area, right off of Greenwood and Horn.
Do you know who Mary Gret is? Who it was named for?
It was a lady named Mary Gret. I don't actually remember who she was, but she was big into the students with special needs, and they dedicated the school to her.
And now they call it special needs.
Students with special needs.
And then I think they used to call it special education.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's something called resources, right?
Resource.
And then there's 901 or something.
Yeah.
What's 901?
I believe that 901 has to do with maybe assistive technology or reasonable.
I have something. Well, the reason in my Social Security disability classes, classes, in my Social Security disability practice, a lot of times I'm looking at these transcripts. And these government agencies, for whatever reason, feel the need to change the names of stuff. I don't know what the story on that. I think it's kind of not honest or something, or I wonder about it. It's like community service in my criminal practice. People still call probation community service, and now it's called community service, and it causes some degree of confusion. So you called your students special needs, right?
Well, yeah, they always tried when we were in school. They always tried to teach us student first language, so it was a student with special needs.
Okay.
Instead of referring to a handicap or
So I'm sorry.
People didn't like the terms mental retardation or MR. It just seemed a little bit more harsher.
Right. That's what, Yeah, I didn't even mention that was called mental retardation at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the big thing when I was in school on the playgrounds, that was the big insult. You call somebody a retard.
Oh yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Did they still do that?
Oh,
Did
it
they
was when I was young. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, retard. Okay. So then now they refer to people with ever low IQs, et cetera, mental retardation. Now they call it special needs. And then you would teach how many people in the special needs class?
My classroom consisted probably around between 10 to 13 students, 10 to 15, and I would have 2 paraprofessionals in the classroom with me. So, but the kids range. There was a huge range. So you would have kids with autism. You'll have your higher level kids with Down syndrome, some with learning disabilities. So it was just a very wide variety.
Did you have a bachelor's degree to be doing this job?
Yes, I had a bachelor's degree. I got my bachelor's degree at Texas A&M Corpus Christi in communications.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I continued. I got my master's in education.
I'm sorry. And did you do that? Did you get the job teaching with a bachelor's in communications?
Well, actually, when I was going for my degree in communications, I was always a substitute teacher to work my way through college. And that's how I started.
That's a good gig, man.
It was a great gig.
$100 a day?
It was $100 a day.
Yeah.
You know, you picked your days, and
Yeah.
it really helped out. And then I started substituting some special ed classes,
I
some
did that
resource
too.
and
I spent-
adaptive ed courses,
Yeah.
and I really started to enjoy the students. I liked them more so than the high school students. So once I got out of college, I decided, you know what, I wanted to go into the teaching field. So I went for my master's, and then I got certified at the Educational Service Center, the Region 2 here, and they got me my certification. So off I went, and I got a job right out of college at Mary Gret, and I was there for 2 years, and then for 3 years, and then for the last 2 years, I transferred to the homebound department, which was also housed in Mary Gret. You know, that was just more of a coincidence. But for the last 2 years, I was a homebound teacher, so it still fell under the special ed umbrella. But these were different students, where maybe a student got in a car wreck and they broke both their legs and they weren't physically able to go to school, and they had to stay home, or for for cancer, they are getting treatment. So I would go to the hospital or to their house and provide their education there.
So if let's somebody who was in a severe accident and they were God forbid burned or something, then you would go maybe for a whole year for 3 to 4 hours to their house?
Or the hospital bed.
Huh, that'd be interesting. I didn't know they did that. So how much money did you make as a teacher when you left with a master's degree?
The only difference between a master's and a bachelor's degree in education is probably about a $1,000 stipend. I don't know how it is today, but that's how it is when I was teaching. They started me off in around 2003. I think I started around 32,000,
Mm-hmm.
and when I left, I was making around 45 between.
Okay.
Depending if I taught.
Now
summer school.
here's what I wanted to talk about briefly. We always heard complaints about how much teachers made, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it would seem to me at $45,000 a year without working in the summers, 2 weeks off for Christmas, etc., that if you got a part-time job at all to flesh it out, you'd be making somewhere around $60 a year, right?
You could possibly.
Yeah. And then a lawyer, how many lawyers getting out of course, that was after a couple of years you were making that, right?
Yeah, they started me off at 30.
Okay. But I mean, a lawyer gets out of law school, he might be working 60 hours a week, and he ain't making 60. The average lawyer doesn't get a job making $60,000 out of law school.
Yeah, I think
right?
that we're talking about that earlier. It's like
Right.
these expectations. You get out of law school and everybody says, "Oh, you're going to be rich." But
When I was going to law school, the big thing was, the prestigious thing at that time was, at the University of Houston, if you were in the top 10%, I think, at University of Houston, probably top 25% at University of Texas, and maybe at a school like some of the other schools, you'd have to, that weren't as academically high, even in a higher percentile. But let's say take University of Houston. I think if you were in the top 25%, you could get a job at Fulbright and Jaworski or Vincent and Elkins. And that was very prestigious at that time, because you would there was this track we would hear about, and I don't know why some of these people hung around me, but some of my friends made this deal, right? I'd been around for a while. I don't know about you, but I like you, I didn't go right to law school, and I was a man. I'd been around. I mean, it was hard for me to sit there that number of hours and study. How many hours a night did you have to study, like the first year of law school?
Oh, the first year of law school.
Yeah.
Well, it was Monday through Friday school from 8 in the mornings, your first class, and you got out at
5:30, right?
Yeah, 5:30.
Yeah.
So I would get home, have lunch and dinner, and between 7 to 11, Monday.
Well, what I found is that's what I thought. I said, well, I could study 4 hours a day. That's a lot. But did you have students like this? We had people that literally weren't sleeping at night that were studying like 10, 12 hours a day. Did you have that?
Yes.
I don't know, psychologically, I couldn't do that.
I mean, it was tough because, even at just studying, I would say a minimum of 4 hours a day and little breaks between the day while you're in school, you're just more of treading water, keeping afloat.
Right.
You weren't going above and beyond because like you're saying, there was the other students trying to make top 10% because they wanted those big jobs. And
well, I thought, I guess we go into there cocky because you're in college is, there's a certain level there, but then you go to law school thinking, well, I'm a smart guy, this and that. And then, it's very difficult.
It's very difficult, especially at our school. We had the attrition rate was at 20% for our 1L class. So what they would tell us is, besides having to study, you would be literally scared that you're about to get cut, and they did cut you, the bottom 20%.
So see now where the schools were in, they filtered you out before you went, like University of Houston. It was basically you were filtered out probably before you got in there, and of course University of Texas even more so. Basically, those two law schools that I had some familiarity with, almost no one flunked out.
Oh, no.
Now that didn't mean you didn't study hard. That didn't mean it was difficult, but very few people flunked out.
No, they would curve you out. At
so
our
if you go
school.
to Thurgood Marshall Law School in Houston, your first year 20% failed, just definitely.
The bottom.
No matter how they might be atypically smart or something, but they just flunk you out.
Well, I mean, with how they do it, it was really interesting because if there was a class of say about 30 people in your classroom, they would pretty much say, well, based on 30 people, we're going to give out 5 A's, 7 B's. The majority are going to be C's, and 2 of you will get D's or F's. So it wasn't a matter of if it was who was going to get the D or the F, and they pretty much did that with every single class. So that's how they would control it. So it's whenever you would test, they would put you on a list of who scored the highest to who scored the lowest, and whoever you fell on the lowest score, well, you got the D or the F. And at the very end of the semester, if your GPA fell below a 2.0, then you're cut.
So getting back to what I got off on that, you were teaching at a Mary Gret school, and after whatever you were making $45,000 with the summers off, etc. And you were teaching. You actually went into that special program where you'd go to people's houses and teach, right?
Yes.
And but how would you have like the facilities? You don't have a desk, or you know what I'm saying? Or could you do this on a laptop? I mean, would you come like to something like this? And what's the deal? How would you do that?
Every situation was different because you were going into the students' houses. So,
right.
Every condition was a different environment, that's for sure.
And when we talk about, like, did you have, there's these alphabet labels, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, different children with different diseases, ADD, attention deficit disorder. Did you teach a lot of those students at Mary Gret, or when you were,
No, the students with like ADHD would probably, when I was in school, we had resource. So whenever they needed the special needs, they would go, or have a test, they would go into a classroom or that extra class to get that help. That would be more of the resource where they had more of a learning disability, not per se, disabled. The students that I was dealing with, especially at Mary Gret, were more of the severe to mild categories of mental retardation or Down syndrome, autism.
I think I did that 1 or 2 days when I substituted when I was doing in-school suspension, but there was like a class, 8th or 9th grade, of these children. And the big thing I noticed was, you had to get them to sit down was the number one thing, because they'll all be wandering around and all that, right?
Oh yeah.
And this is something I'll ask you about. But one thing that I found is what was difficult, and I guess is a skill level that I didn't learn because I didn't take education in school or anything. You get somebody that back then they said mentally retarded, but they weren't mentally retarded in everything. They may not be able to speak very well, but they might be very sly or insightful about your personality, and then say something to freak you kind of out. or you know what I mean? They're not. I guess the supposition is through a layman like me is that again they're slow in everything, but that didn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a wide variety of students you dealt with. Everybody was unique in their own way.
Do you think that? What do you think of Mary Gret? Do you think it's pretty well run? You think it's successful?
It's great. I loved Mary Gret. I think it was.
Do you think it's productive for the students?
It was very productive. I know the students enjoyed going to school there because the whole school was a special ed campus. Entirely. The school was built to house students. It had the bathing facilities, the bathrooms. Everything was made specifically for this type of population of student, and just the students being there, I honestly felt there wasn't that type of discrimination or bullying. I think that's like the today's term, like everybody's getting bullied. And you didn't get that at Mary Gret because you weren't with the general population. And
well, that's good to hear. Right?
I thought it was great. I honestly could say that I felt that they enjoyed their 2 or 3 years or whatever, how long they were there for, and they didn't want to leave. They enjoyed it.
And you felt but enjoying it was one thing. Do you think they were learning too?
I think so. I mean, it takes their learning because when they were at King High School or Moody, they would focus more on academics, and every student had a different level of what they could achieve, and there was definitely a floor and a ceiling. But at Mary Gret, my personal philosophy was to change it up because I wasn't really teaching per se, addition and subtraction. I was saying, you know what, guys, we're out of high school. Let's go into the real world. So what I would do is say, well, we need to learn how to write the public transportation, the RTA. Yeah. So I would show them how to, and we would do that twice a week. We'll go riding around town. Then after we get more adjusted to how the buses run, then the next thing would be, hey, we would have cooking classes, and we'll teach them how to cook. And then I would integrate HEB. Well, here's our budget. You need to find these items. So I would do a whole trip of going onto the bus, going to HEB, budgeting their money, coming back on the bus, going to Mary Gret and cooking the cookies or whatever they bought, or a cake, the ingredients, and then just trying to more of a whole integration of trying to live in the real world. And
that was your idea primarily?
That was my focus, because they would do half day with me, and then the other half day they would be in a job training, a vocational. I believe her name was Sarah Ramirez. She was excellent.
So do you know who would place these, young people, children with jobs? Was there a placement?
There was a couple facilities for that would hire them, like Goodwill and stuff to do janitorial services. We had other institutes, like Walmart was excellent. They would let our students volunteer, and it wasn't honestly about the money. It was just about more of a personal satisfaction or achievement they had, because they wanted to, they're 18, 20 years old. They want to go to work like everybody else does, and have that satisfaction and feel like they're part.
How many of the children were on Social Security disability or SSI?
I would say close to 100%.
Close to 100%. So in fact, if they went to work, then they would they would be off of that program.
Well, we had to monitor their pay. I believe they only could make around $13,000 for the year or something. Yeah, it was a very low amount of number.
Lower than that, I think. But
I'm not too sure on the number. But we would monitor that, so we would make sure that they didn't exceed it. And if they did exceed it, we would let the parents know that they were going to reduce or offset the Social Security benefits. And a lot of times the parents were fine with it.
Right, right. I'm sure they were, because that way they'd be more productive. They'd be out of the house more, maybe learning more. What about there was a Supreme Court case, man, about 15 years ago, I think, where, or maybe 12 years ago, wherein they were going to mainstream all the children with disabilities, and it seemed to me they were basically stating that no matter how extreme the disability, the schools were going to have to accommodate children with real extreme disabilities. Is that right? Are you familiar with that Supreme Court case?
I don't know.
That would have been before your time, I think. You know.
But I know that I understand the concept you're talking about. Today, I think they're really doing a real big push, and this is more of the resource room. If you remember, like when I was in school, there would be the students that would have to leave the room to go to the resource room to take the test, and they're kind of trying to phase that out, especially in other cities where they're doing. It's called co-teaching. So in the math classroom, you have your math teacher, and then also they'll have the co-teacher, which is a special ed teacher in there. So the special ed teacher knows which students are that need the extra help, but they're not identified to all the other general population. And that special ed teacher doesn't just help the special ed students, but she or he helps all of the students, but also is able to identify quickly, or able to work and still provide the assistance the special ed student needs, or needs, like I believe it was like a learning resource room.
So I see. So you think that's a good idea?
I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea, but I personally, I would think I wouldn't want to have to go to the room and have that type of stigma attached to me, going through school of I have to go to another room. So personally, if I had to do that, I would prefer having another teacher. So, providing the extra help that I probably needed without everybody knowing I needed the help. And I think it's a great idea in that respect.
I would think the students would find out anyway, maybe. Or maybe, I don't know, I'm just talking, I have no idea, but it would seem to me that, talk about bullied, they might be set up to being bullied because they're slow in some areas, or they might be ridiculed because it was obvious that they didn't know. You know what I'm saying?
I hear you. But I think they try to minimize that. They don't try to point it out that, like, little Joe here, he's the one that needs the help, and this is why the special ed teacher's in the class, because the whole class gets help from the special ed teacher, but the special ed teacher knows that little Joe is having trouble with addition or subtraction, so she'll spend a little bit extra more time with him and helping him out, but still giving the presence that she helps everybody, because everybody,
That's interesting.
And I think it's working, and I know CCISD is moving towards that direction. I know in San Antonio, other schools, my friends were telling me when we were all special ed teachers that they are in the classroom, and my sister's a special ed teacher. She was a co-teacher as well at South Park. So I know they're moving towards that direction.
Well, now that you're practicing law on your own, it's quite a different world, isn't it?
It's a big difference.
Because when you're practicing in the law, a lot of times you have to win, or you have to know how to produce, and of course, especially if you're really on your own, you have to bring in money and all that. What kind of law have you been practicing since you've been on your own?
Primarily family law, personal injury insurance, immigration law.
So
I could also
when you say family law, it's actually primarily divorce and child custody law. Isn't that what it is?
Pretty much. Divorce, child custody, visitation, possession, and access to the children.
So if I want to get divorced, and let's say, I want to get divorced, a simple divorce. I've been married 3 years, and we live in an apartment. We got no money.
Mm-hmm.
We got no money. We got no kids. I want to file for divorce. How much does it cost?
Well, the courts will charge you around $240 to file the divorce.
What does the average lawyer in Corpus Christi charge for a simple divorce like I just described? Do you know?
Gosh, I couldn't say. The prices vary. Probably between $1,000, $2,000, I would assume, for a simple divorce, no community property, no children.
How many hours do you think it takes an attorney who's doing a simple divorce, and maybe who's been doing it for a little while? How long do you think it really takes him to talk to the client, do the form, file the lawsuit, go to court, prove it up? How many hours do you think all that takes, do you think?
Well,
it's got to take 4 hours, right?
Well, definitely 4
It's gotta
hours.
at
I
least
mean,
take
it's
4.
it's going to take your half a day going to court, going to the prove-up hearing. You have
Well, it depends upon if there's cases before you and how long you got to wait and all that, right?
correct. So it definitely takes a little time doing that. As far as the forms, you have to be real careful because every divorce is unique, in terms of what they have and their children.
People like to. I'm sorry.
So, there's not one boilerplate out there. You always have to modify it, make sure it's right,
People like to tell you a long story. They got a long story. They do that in criminal law a lot too. Well, I got this long story. Well, yeah, but first I need to know what you're charged with, and then I need to know what evidence there is against you. That's the important thing. The story about why you're mad at somebody, and then I was walking down the street, and whatever, is not necessarily too relevant. So a lot of times people do that in family law. I think it's worse in family law than in criminal law.
You get the stories, for sure. The blame, the hurt, the pain. He said, she said. It's all part of the job. But at the end of the day, I guess some people will say, well, at least I know my mom always says, you never want to hear my story. You just want to get to the point. Because I always tell her, well, it really doesn't matter. It really just matters what you own. And
there was a professor who was kind of mean at University of Houston some years ago. You could argue that he was very mean, and God bless his soul, he's passed away now. His name was Eugene Smith, and he was one of these terrifying professors that you'd get your first year, right? There was always one
Yes.
or two, right?
Oh, I remember mine, yes.
Right. And he said at one point that the practice of the law is going to separate you from your friends or family because of the basic way that you think. I think there's some truth in that, and that's what you're saying there, right?
Yeah, there's definitely some truth. Something like when you're hearing stories and people's problems, and they'll talk to you for about 30 minutes to an hour at a time, and you just really want to know, did they sign the contract? But they just don't want to say yes or no. They want to explain the whole circumstances surrounding it before they get to the punchline. And all you really want to know is, did you sign it?
Are you surprised by the number of people sometimes that don't tell you the total truth when you ask them?
Yeah.
Because you're going to find out anyway, right?
Yeah, you're going to find out anyway. And it was really interesting because I thought that the client attorney relationship, it's based on
right. They came in on their own.
I'm not.
They want to hire you. You think, right?
And we have an ethical obligation not to be discussing what our clients say. And I don't know if they believe it or not, but they have a little bit of distrust, and they don't want to tell you the whole story. I don't know if they want to try to paint a better picture of themselves. But sure enough, once you pull up their criminal history and start analyzing the facts more closely, then you go back and you have to say, like, well, hey, you didn't mention this, or you didn't mention that.
Yeah, and you can't think of enough questions to ask them. I mean, obviously, the longer you practice, you have seen questions that need to be asked. You'll think of additional questions that need to be asked through your years of experience. But no matter how experienced you are, if there are some of these things that come up, you don't think to ask the question, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and they're hiding it from you, and they know it's important. I think.
I think so.
So that I've always been I'm still surprised to this day. Listen, I got a story on that. I was just briefly. I was representing a guy who was accused of sexually molesting a child, right? I go to trial, I find out, and he has a very, to this day I still think he was innocent. I believe that. But I find out right before we go to trial that he with another girlfriend had taken a child to Driscoll Hospital with bruises in the exact same way that this had happened on this alleged new case. And he didn't tell me. And then I find out, a matter of a couple weeks before trial, and thinking, well, this is going to come into evidence. This is going to hurt our case. And It did. So, I mean, something even very major like that, and he was never convicted of that case, but it was investigated, and it was the same exact whatever pattern, so they were able to get in evidence. Man, if I would have known that earlier. But so that's, I wouldn't have thought, well, to ask that particular question. So it does occur a lot.
It does, and I don't know if it's just sometimes they think that they didn't get charged with the crime, or they got deferred.
You're not going to find out.
Or they say, well, it was deferred, so it doesn't count. And I don't know sometimes why they want to hold information, because to be honest with you, when you are talking to your attorney, you really need to let them know everything possible, so he or she can make the best judgment call.
At least everything that, everything that that's going to come out that is public record.
That's related,
right? That is related, that they've got to watch out for, especially if you go to trial. And then why did you decide to do immigration law? Have you done that before?
I did when I was a 1L.
First year law
student.
We didn't use that phrase.
Oh yeah, we have 1L, 2L, 3L.
We didn't do that.
During my first year, I did my internship.
It's a digital age. Just kidding.
I did my internship with the Garcia law firm, and he practiced primarily immigration law. So I had a lot of experience of working.
So the immigration law is basically, you got all these illegals you're trying to get legalized. Isn't that a lot of it? Isn't that a lot of it?
That's a lot of it, and sometimes it's bringing over families, from other countries, trying to unite families, people that came here the legal way, and that's what most people don't understand. It's of the process, and
the left is trying to pass a law regarding, what is it? Something like, well, you came here illegally, but you've been here legal so long, and you have family over there or something, you should be able to bring them over. Isn't there something like going on like that? Have you heard about that?
Yeah, they've been trying to pass a lot of laws with the immigration. Immigration's a real hot topic. I know back in the days, they passed a few laws where they granted amnesty, and I believe it happened during George Bush's when he was president.
There was a big amnesty program during Ronald Reagan's administration. I know that because I worked in it. Yeah.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan was real good.
We went out to West Texas and was doing.
And George Bush also passed it, and I believe.
Yeah, they keep doing these amnesty
and they do the amnesty programs every so often. That's a good idea? If they're here illegally, they've been here for 10 years or how many years they've been here, and they want to become legal citizens, I don't see why it's not a bad idea.
The reason I thought it was a bad idea is because you're basically training these people, come in illegally, and sooner or later you qualify for an amnesty program. So therefore, you're never going to have an effective immigration policy. That's why I wondered about that.
That's the argument.
Right.
That's the argument. You're rewarding people for coming in illegally, but but in the real world, I mean, when you see people, they have families here. They've been here for 10 or 20 years.
And then you're advocating for them, and you're seeing their side of it.
And they have children.
Right.
The children are U.S. citizens. All they know is America.
Right.
So when you actually start putting faces to the names, it becomes a little bit more disheartening to see someone's father have to go back to Mexico, and then an immigration judge say, well, your family could go with them, and they don't even know how to speak Spanish. Or
and
the
children
know
the culture.
They don't know the culture, and but that's the reality of the matter.
Right. Right, and then that's your responsibility, and that's a lot of responsibility.
And it is. The best way, people always say, what's the best way to immigrate, and most people get a little confused thinking, well, if I come into America and I marry an American citizen, I automatically become an American.
Right.
That is far from the truth. I mean, that is not so.
But it used to be that way, I think.
Well, I know it's not that way, because the one thing that they have to do is enter the country legally.
Well, yeah, enter legally. And then,
if they get married, and that's another story.
I'll tell you some anecdotal stories that I know. It used to be like there used to be a lot of... my mother's Greek, and we know a lot of people that there were a lot of, whatever this would be, when would this be, 20s to the 40s or whatever, 20s to the 60s or whatever, they would visit the States, and then they would send word out that they needed to marry that their daughter or son, their daughter usually, seemed like it was, needed to get married to a citizen, right? and then usually, of course, it would be in maybe that Greek community. So they would marry a Greek person with the idea that they would get maybe divorced after a certain period of time. This is what my understanding of what was working. You get divorced after a certain period of time, and the marriage would not be consummated. There would not be sexual relations between the two, just long enough for them to become an American citizen. And allegedly, there was money that would change hands. This is some years ago. Did you ever hear that kind of scam deal going
Yeah,
on?
they in the immigration field, they call it a sham marriage.
Okay, so there's even a name for it.
They have a name for it, a sham marriage. But the
deal.
immigration courts, if you decide to marry a U.S. citizen, you came in legally and you want to apply for your citizenship, I believe you have to be married for 2 years. So
maybe they got that deal going.
So it's a little, you have to stick with it a little longer. But I know one case in particular. I was dealing with a couple, and we tried to petition for his new wife to become a citizen. And they require interviews with the couple. They want to know everything about your history, your dating. Pictures need to be submitted to the immigration customs officials. And they denied her particular application. I was actually shocked because they said, well, all the pictures you submitted of their time together, because they want to see pictures of you, like in different areas at different times. She was wearing the same shirt. And I didn't even catch it. And they say, well, we don't think this marriage is, we think it's fake.
So they have some degree of...
oh, yes.
Yeah, they know what
I
they're
mean, I believe they pulled the wool over my eyes, but
right. Not the people who know what they were doing. And we always hear about immigration primarily from Mexico, but what about from South America? Do you when you were doing that before, and I don't know, I don't think you haven't been licensed that long, but when you were doing it before, did you see many immigrants from South America?
I would think primarily it was more of South America than it was Mexico. A lot from El Salvador, Honduras.
And did they get this classification as being from a persecuted group or from being a war-torn country? Isn't there a classification for that under immigration law that allows these also Salvadorans or Honduran people to come?
There was a couple under different classifications. A lot of the times when we were getting the clients from El Salvador or Honduras, that we would always try to file sometimes an asylum petition for them, because they would always claim the violence in the country, the MS-13, the gangs out there, and then sometimes there were some older people that were under this other type of protection from the wars back in like the 80s, which I wasn't too familiar with because I was such a young child back then. But
yeah, there was some real tragic things that happened in South America. I'm not familiar with all of it. I know that there was allegations of some American involvement too. The CIA, etc. What about Canadians? I know that I have met a number of Canadian nurses from Canada here. I assume that they don't have a very difficult time coming here because of their some sort of need, that's specialized need or something that's proven here. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, different states like the British, French, Canadians, especially
yes.
The British Isles. They have looser restrictions as to allowing them to come in whenever they want, just as we're able to freely travel anywhere we would like to.
Except for Cuba. Maybe except for Cuba.
They're not too worried about
but
us.
there was another kind of a scam or sham going on where people would somehow get into Canada. It was easier to get in there, and then you go to Canada and you stay there for a couple of years and you come into the States. Have you heard of that one?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, I think that was another one. And what other classifications are there? I think there's some now too. If you're even maybe a battered wife or persecuted for different reasons.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of exceptions to the rule, and that's how the law is. But pretty much.
That's why they need lawyers, right?
Yes.
If everything were perfect, they wouldn't need lawyers. That's for sure.
One of the exceptions for especially illegal immigrants, if you come into this country illegally, chances of you becoming a citizen is very slim. But however, there are exceptions. One of them is the battered wife exception. So if a wife, or I would think a male, if is
happen.
Is a victim of crime, and you're able to document it, and you could apply for citizenship. There's other exceptions for like I believe the sex trafficking type of business that's been going on, or we hear about.
So if you're a victim of being, being enslaved, virtually enslaved as a sexual victim or something,
You'll have an opportunity to become a U.S. citizen.
is the immigration law is not on the bar, is it?
No, immigration law is not in the bar on the bar.
But I
Not
believe
tested.
family law is covered, right?
Family
Pretty
law.
thoroughly.
That's 2 essays on family law.
And what about other federal law? I think is federal criminal on there?
The only federal law that's mainly on there is probably the whatever you would take for your constitutional law. That's tested on day 2 in the MBE.
Okay. Well, I wanted to thank you, Emmett Reyes, for coming on the show, doing immigration law, doing family law. Thank you very much, and good luck. It's a lot of fun.
So who's your next guest?
Gather your deeds and your possessions, whatever certainty you've known. Forget your heroes, you don't really need those last few lessons. Stand in the open, the next voice you hear will be your own. But alright, they knew how they could hurt you, and you let them cut you to the bone. But God forbid you allow them to rid you of your virtue. Forget their laughter, the next voice you hear will be your own. The next voice you hear, 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 the next voice you hear will be your own. Throw down your truth and check your weapon. Don't look to see if you're alone. Just stand your ground.